Hey everyone, how you doing? You know, one of these days I'm gonna make a video that isn't about Transformers. But today's not that day. I'm gonna assume you all know what we're talking about here because, unlike myself, I assume my viewers possess the ability to read the title. For the literarily challenged like me, however, we will be taking a look at Transformers War for Cybertron Siege. This video might seem a bit more like a series review compared to my other videos, since to be honest, I'm still trying to figure out whether this show is good or not. I enjoyed it, but I also enjoyed Transformers Cybertron, which is by no means perfect, to put it lightly. I'd started to write a whole section at this point about how to determine if media is good, differentiating quality from value and how those go together, but I'm not going to include that here. The topic of media being good is complicated, and a subject that would probably need an entire video just to work out my own thoughts on, so look forward to that. I will still be answering whether or not Siege is a good show in this video, however, it just might not be until a little bit later that I can properly establish what good means. I think by that last paragraph alone, most of you can probably figure out what my general thoughts on the show are. After all, I wouldn't be explaining how I need to dissect what the term good really means if the show is a masterstroke of artistic genius or a disastrous embarrassment that would warrant an amendment to the Geneva Convention. So yes, put simply, the show is meh in terms of quality. I for sure had fun watching it. I found myself almost always looking forward to the next episode and wanting to continue right away. However, these are all subjective feelings, and as a wise, almost middle-aged man who I am considerably taller than, not to brag, once said, facts don't care about your feelings. So what are the facts? Does the show objectively possess much quality regardless of my personal liking? Let's find out. First, I'm going to try and give a brief story synopsis, and I say try because I know I tend to go over more of the story than I need to, and I don't want this video to be 70% plot synopsis. The Saint Sunday Morning cartoons. To start off our story, we see Wheeljack and Bumblebee on a scavenging mission for CYBERTRON, reminiscent to the first scene in the G1 cartoon. In this universe, Bumblebee is a freelance scavenger though, not an Autobot. He doesn't want to get tied up in the ongoing Autobot-Decepticon war. He just wants to be Han Solo. Unfortunately for him, he gets roped in when Wheeljack powers up a derelict space bridge they come across, leading to the Decepticon Seekers finding them. The Seekers in this universe are led by Jetfire, this time not Starscream. And for anybody else who has seen G1 or my SMC videos, you probably know where this is going. The Seekers in this show act kind of like a Decepticon patrol/police force. If you're expecting a politically charged police joke given the current situation in America, then too bad. I've already made one politically charged reference earlier, so I need to limit myself before this channel starts to look at the mainstream media. Anyway, Starscream tries to commit a war crime, so Jetfire cuts his hand off. Then Megatron shows up, says to do war crimes anyway. Luckily, Optimus Prime shows up and stops the execution, so Megatron tries to get Optimus to sign the Treaty of Versailles. Optimus refuses because he's a proud German nationalist, and so they have a very one-sided fight where Megatron easily wins. Just before he's killed though, the Autobot Elita 1 caps the Seeker in the head, and in the shootout, the Autobots, plus B, flee. Oh, actually kinda rhymes. They head back to the secret Autobot HQ, which is their ship, the Ark, and we see that the Autobots aren't in great shape. Optimus goes to speak with Ultra Magnus, his second in command, on the war effort, and Magnus confirms what we've seen. It ain't going well. Magnus even pleads with Optimus to accept the treaty Megatron proposed, but Optimus is too idealistic to give in. Looking around and seeing how there are plenty of wounded, no energon, not enough soldiers to fight on the front, it's not a surprise that Bumblebee refuses an offer Optimus makes to sign up. Elita suggests they can't just let Bumblebee leave since he knows the location of their base now, hinting that maybe killing him might not be a bad idea. Optimus is pissed at the idea of committing war crimes, which kind of bums out some of the others. As Bumblebee leaves, we see Ultra Magnus looking edgy outside as we cut to Megatron giving a big speech. Megatron explains to Decepticons how he offered an olive branch of peace and the Autobots responded by trying to assassinate him, which, to be fair, isn't technically incorrect. Also, I don't know why Elita 1 just didn't blow off Megatron's head instead of random goon number 37. Anyway, this essentially gives him a mandate to continue the war and rallies the Decepticon people. Outside the venue, we see a mysterious cloaked figure approaching. His face is shrouded, masking his identity due to a lack of any other distinguishing features. It truly does leave you on a cliffhanger as to who it could possibly be as the episode cuts to black. The next episode on our journey is called Episode 2, which is a reference to the fact that this is the second episode. We start with Megatron on his throne and everyone just kind of idling around in silence until Megatron remembers that he's supposed to be giving orders. Skywarp then remembers he's supposed to let Megatron know that someone's coming, and by coming, he means tossing a guy through the door. The Decepticons demand the anonymous figure to reveal himself, and the bot slowly pulls back his hood, showing that he was Ultra Magnus the whole time.
Dear God.
There's more.
No.
Magnus says that as the Autobot military commander, he has come to surrender and negotiate peace. In the negotiating room, we get some insight into Megs and Magnus' history together, learning that they were war buddies back in Nam. Magnus tells Megatron he wants peace, but Optimus won't listen. Megatron responds with saying Magnus could end the war by ordering the Autobots to just stand down. Magnus replies by saying he won't force them to do what they think is wrong, and he wants both sides to enter peace talks willingly. Magnus ends up in a prison cell, so I'll let you guess how that went over with Megatron. Back at the Autobot camp, Optimus lets everyone know that Magnus has surrendered. Many bots panic and they believe they need to evacuate, but Optimus doesn't think Magnus would reveal their location. Optimus affirms to the others he will continue the fight with Elita 1 taking over military command. This is also the point in my rewatch where I switched the audio to Japanese in order to get the full anime experience. Disclaimer, I did not get the full experience. Over at Decepticon Central, Shockwave, or as Japanese Megatron would say, comes to Megatron with a plan. He reveals that the Allspark, the source of all Cybertronian life, which is considered a myth by many, was proven to be real by Alpha Trion, long story, and they may be able to use it to their advantage. He suggested if they had the Allspark, they could manipulate it to reformat the minds of the Autobots, essentially rewriting their code into being loyal Decepticons. Unfortunately, the Decepticon architects decided to put the prison block in the same section as the room with the big planning TV, and Ultra Magnus was able to overhear the plan and signal a warning to Optimus. You'd expect the Decepticons would have a way to prevent prisoners from calling home, but you'd be wrong. Megatron agrees that Operation Genocide is tempting, but needs time to consider. His reasoning seems more pragmatic, given the manpower it would take to scour the planet, while Jetfire seems more concerned that, it's kind of a dick move. Over with Optimus and friends, they receive Ultra Magnus' message and set out to find the Allspark before Megatron can. Some of the bots rightfully believe that this is at best a distraction and at worst a trap, given that Magnus abandoned the bots and is now a Decepticon prisoner, but Optimus is adamant in trusting Magnus. Speaking of whom, Soundwave comes to Megatron letting him know that Magnus sent out a warning from the holding cells, and presumably he could hear that conversation as well because, he's just down the hall. Megatron then reasons that if Optimus will be looking for the Allspark, perhaps they should just set a trap. Oh, look at that. The bots just got a transmission from Magnus with the exact location of the Allspark. I don't know why you needed to sound the alarm for that, but, okay. They're in for a bit of a prank though, because that message was actually Soundwave copying Magnus' voice and setting it on the same frequency as before. The Autobot team arrives at the coordinates and begins their search, while we also see that the Khan sent a whopping dozen guys or so to ambush them. Any more would have just made it unfair. Would have been a shame if, an entire division was on standby. Also, just want to point out that Megatron will pop in to check on some random patrol of Seekers, but not go with the team to ambush Optimus Prime and ideally end the war. This guy's gotta rework his priorities. The bots split up and look for clues, until one group runs into what they think could be the Allspark. They find a cool little cube of Energon instead, and it's about at this time they realize, oh, this might be a trap. They realize it a bit too late though, and Cog, this guy, gets a nice chunk of his chest just kind of blown off. A battle ensues and everyone's shooting at everybody until the bots drop a big building on the Khans, suddenly crushing this guy, Impactor, who I guess is important. It was also about here that I swapped the language over to German to see if it would be more entertaining. Unfortunately, it was not what I'd wished for, so all I did was get my hopes up for a downfall at Escarant that, never happened.
Feiglinge! Verreiter Versager! Mein Führer, ich kann nicht zulassen, dass die Soldaten, die für Sie
The bots manage to slip away, and despite missing basically his whole chest, Cog's gonna be fine. No luck's been found on looking for the real Allspark using the ARC systems either, so you could say that things are not going great. Megatron, on the other hand, is just a bit upset that not only did the ambush fail and their Energon cube went missing, but one of his best soldiers, Impactor, kinda got flattened. Well, looks like both sides lost, so we'll call it a draw. The last scene we see is Megatron giving the go-ahead for Shockwave's reformatting plan. End episode 2, start episode 3. I'll give you a hint as to what this episode's called. It starts with episode, and ends with something that rhymes with 3. Oh, no, wait, it is 3. We begin with a lone Cybertronian, Ratchet, roaming the site of the battle from the previous episode when he stumbles across Impactor, who has been impaled under some rubble, but is very much alive. While it isn't impossible that the Decepticons wouldn't find Impactor during their search or detect that he was alive via some signal or vital signs or whatever, I think it is pretty unlikely that Ratchet just kind of happens to stumble across him when he wasn't even looking for anyone. Impactor assumes that Ratchet's here to finish the job, but spoiler alert, he's not. In the meantime, Optimus formulates a new plan to keep Megatron from getting the Allspark. If nowhere safe on Cybertron, just don't have it on Cybertron. Big brain move right here. The Autobots aren't sure if that's a sound plan though, because while the Allspark has never left the planet, Cybertronian religions believe that if the Allspark does leave, Cybertron dies. Obviously that wouldn't be very good for everyone, so Optimus leaves that idea in the perhaps box. Speaking of genocidal plans, we see that Starscream is discussing Megatron's reformatting plan with a handful of Decepticons, arguing that reformatting the Autobots would be a disgusting idea. Not because of anything like, ethics. He's worried that it'll dilute the Decepticon race by essentially creating a sect of fake Decepticons who will not share their warrior heritage. This raises an interesting point in the show, which there are tons of undertones about the Autobots and Decepticons not merely being factions, but rather separate races. It's a bit of a touchy subject to handle, as you can imagine, but I appreciate the show doesn't try and make some real-world parallels, and the topic and the themes of this race war stay entirely self-contained within the show. Jetfire enters the chat and butts heads with Starscream, arguing about each other's flaws, but Megatron ends the discussion pretty quickly. While that's all going on, the Autobots continue to discuss the Allspark plan, and Alita argues that even if they had the Allspark, there's no really way to get it off Cybertron without getting shot down. Wheeljack has the answer to that though, and he mentions that the space bridge they found in the first episode might be a way out. He thinks Ratchet could get it up and running, so Optimus is enthusiastic that their plan now has a way to work. The others are less optimistic. After a scene where Megatron almost removes Shockwave's head from existence, we come to a scene with some more war crimes. The Autobot team makes their way to what used to be a theater where they meet Ratchet, who, like Bumblebee in this universe, is not an Autobot. He's an independent guy running his own hospital where he attends to wounded soldiers, both Autobot and Decepticon. Ratchet makes it clear that he isn't a fan of Optimus and blames him at least in part for the war, but the bots insist that they need him to finally put an end to the conflict. We get hints that Ratchet used to create weapons and tools of war until he gave up that trade to pursue a purely altruistic goal of healing. Understandably, he's extremely reluctant to go back to contributing to a war effort and threatens the Autobots with force to leave. Mirage responds in kind, but Impactor dives in to protect Ratchet. Impactor and the bots get into a bit of race politics, but Ratchet breaks up the interesting argument and now respectfully asks Prime and the team to leave as they're upsetting the patients. As they're about to leave, however, Wheeljack convinces Ratchet to at least hear them out before they depart. Over at Megatron's Happy Fun Time Palace, Ultra Magnus is being tortured for information about the Autobot base, but is refusing to give in. Megatron and Jetfire depart, and Magnus has an opportunity to break free, grabbing a guard's weapon and turning it on Megatron's back. Megatron insists Jetfire stands down and tells Magnus to pull the trigger. Magnus orders Megatron to turn and face him, which he refuses. Megatron knows Magnus has too much honor to shoot him in the back, which proves to be true, letting Jetfire slice the gun in two and subdue him. Magnus is chained up again and taken away, losing the one chance anyone might have had to kill Megatron. The next scene takes us back to Ratchet's hospital, where upon learning that the Autobots want him to repair a space bridge again, refuses, but upon hearing that Megatron's plan is to weaponize the Allspark, contemplates for a moment, then agrees. He makes it clear to Prime, however, that he's helping for the safety and well-being of the people, not for the war. Ratchet wants Impactor to take charge of the guard while he assists Prime, but after another argument almost breaks out, Impactor insists he comes with to help Ratchet, since Ratchet saved him. The Autobots are extremely reluctant to take him on, but after Impactor explains how his loyalties lie with Cybertron and not Megatron, they eventually agree. On the topic of Megatron, he's busy doing even more intense torture with Ultra Magnus, and we see that Megatron actually has a hard time watching, not even able to look at Ultra Magnus at first. He orders Shockwave to turn up the intensity as Magnus appeals to their shared past. Magnus begins to literally break until he finally gives in, agreeing to surrender the location of Autobot Command. Cutting back to Team Prime, the group stops on their journey as the Autobots demand Impactor's comms be removed. Ratchet protests, but Impactor agrees, swearing off any allegiance to either faction. As his comms are stripped, his signal comes back online somehow, attracting the attention of Jetfire and Skywarp on patrol. They touch down after a scan and find the entrance to Autobot Command? I swear there must have been a scene missing or a continuity/editing mistake because Impactor's comms were dropped nowhere near the door to Autobot Command, and we never even see the Seekers find his comm device, so I have no idea how they even found the HQ or why they ignored the comms if that's the reason they came to investigate. They don't even land in the same spot as the comms and look around, they simply just drop outside the door. Something must have been overlooked in the production side of things because this continuity just doesn't make sense, and the plot is highly contingent on this happening. Confusing chain events aside, Skywarp suggests they report back to Megatron and slaughter the unsuspecting Autobots, but Jetfire insists on offering a surrender instead, arguing that genocide isn't very nice. Jetfire attempts to stop Skywarp from leaving, resulting in Jetfire shooting Skywarp in the back. Jetfire seems almost shocked at his own action and lets a very badly damaged Skywarp flee. During a propaganda speech Megatron is delivering to the Decepticon people, Skywarp crashes down near Starscream, informing him that Jetfire betrayed him just as his spark is extinguished. The episode wraps up with Megatron revealing his reformatting plan to the people as a means to bring an end to the war in response to Optimus' supposed escalation in the conflict by involving the Allspark. Interestingly, Megatron ends his speech with "Till all are one," a perversion of the same phrase the Autobots use and has been used throughout Transformers, as in this context he means to say that the Autobots and Decepticons will literally become one by rewriting their programming. Nice end to the episode. It's a pretty good scene. Now we're on to the fourth episode, fittingly named Episode 5. That was a lie, just trying to keep you on your toes. I started this episode by changing from German to French because, fun fact, I'm somewhat of a French speaker myself, and so I wanted to test myself a bit. However, I didn't find the French audio very enjoyable, so I swapped back to anime mode for a few minutes. As for the plot though, the episode opens with Megatron and some Decepticons escorting Ultra Magnus, who is leading them to the Autobot base. He brings them to the site of a major battle he and Megatron fought alongside at and gives more insight into their recent history. He mentions how Megatron co-opted and took over Alpha Trion's revolution, corrupting it while Magnus and Optimus learned much from Trion. Magnus leads them to Alpha Trion's memorial, where the Autobot base is supposedly hidden, and opens it, revealing nothing inside. Megatron immediately knows he was lied to, and after some defiant last words, Megatron puts an end to Magnus' life. Jetfire then arrives on the scene and sees Magnus' body, which begins to seemingly reactivate and releases some form of energy that wisps away from the confused Decepticons. Cut to Bumblebee, who's wrapping up another job, when the energy from Magnus takes him by surprise, painfully entering his systems. At this time, Optimus feels a disturbance in the Force, explaining that Alpha Trion's protocols were activated, meaning that Magnus must be dead. Megatron is confused and angry because he feels he's been bamboozled and demands answers from his subordinates. As the cons are wrapping up, Starscream and some Seekers arrive, and before anyone can explain anything, Starscream caps Jetfire. Megatron's confusion only increases, but Starscream informs him of Skywarp's murder, to which Jetfire blatantly admits to. Before the cons can scrap him, he makes a run for it and is pursued and shot down, just as we cut back to the Autobot team arriving with Ratchet at their base. They kind of just sit around and chat, and then we see Bumblebee in agony struggling to take in the energy from Magnus, which appears to be giving him information he doesn't understand and shouldn't know. Back to the Autobots, Optimus has organized 3 teams, one to prep the Ark for departure, one to secure the Allspark, and one to repair the space bridge. As the teams head out, Elita asks Optimus to at least consider the possible ramifications of removing the Allspark from Cybertron, yet he seems to avoid the subject, simply asking her to trust him and be ready. After all, what's the worst that could happen? Aside from the destruction of the entire planet, that one doesn't count. The Space Bridge team is already on their way to the objective, while in the meantime Optimus pays a visit to the Guardians, a mystic and ancient group of Titans who have remained neutral thus far in the war. Optimus inquires about the Alpha Trion protocols, hoping that the energy traveled to the Guardians. He also informs them of Megatron's plan to utilize the Allspark, hoping this will push them into intervening. The Guardians essentially just give them the middle finger, letting Optimus know that the protocols did not come to them and they will still remain neutral.
Hey, you got a second?
Oh,
Optimus.
please, go yourself.
Yeah, that's funny.
Team Spacebridge, on the other hand, is in the midst of repairs when a secret patrol arrived too early, which some cultures consider quite rude, so they kill them. This forces their timetables forward, since more will now be arriving to investigate. Back with the Decepticons, Starscream is promoted to commander of the Seekers, to the dismay of some. Meanwhile, Optimus returns with the bad news, but Elita assures him they'll still find a way. Optimus, usually optimistic to a fault, begins to question whether this crusade of his is truly hopeless, and if he possibly just brought the Autobot people to extinction. He even takes responsibility for the war by opposing Megatron, which raises some interesting questions. I wrote about 2 pages here about the ethics of war and tyrannical governments, but I'm sure that's just boring, you guys don't want to hear it. Also, it's pretty much just a tangent that didn't really go anywhere, and I already have 30 plus pages here, so boop, it's gone. What I was trying to get at is that the show does have some interesting themes, morals, and ethics to discuss. Anyway, Bumblebee forces his way into the base, coming to Optimus for help understanding what is happening to him. Optimus immediately understands that the Alpha Trion protocols must have passed to Bumblebee. He then explains that the Alpha Trion protocols are a vast archive of Autobot knowledge and history, and are possibly sentient since it specifically chose Bumblebee. Bumblebee asks why, and Optimus says only Alpha Trion will know, and so B enters a drug-induced trance where he meets a representation of Alpha Trion. He looks, sounds, and knows everything Alpha Trion would, but he's not Alpha Trion apparently. He may as well be, but I guess it doesn't really matter. Not Trion explains the protocols are a collection of information to assist the Autobots in a time of crisis, but that the knowledge of Alpha Trion and the Matrix of Leadership were split between 2 bots, because no one man should have all that power. Thus, Optimus received the Matrix, while Magnus gained the knowledge of Alpha Trion. Now that Magnus is gone, the protocols have passed the knowledge to someone worthy of carrying it, in this case, Bumblebee. This scene is probably the only one with clear exposition, which is actually nicely delivered and makes sense in-universe why this would be explained, since B is just as unfamiliar as the audience. If there's one thing the show does well, it's delivering information in a natural way. Before Prime and B can discuss anything further, an incoming bogey causes an alarm to go off. Turns out to be Jetfire, who's taken quite some time to die from that crash. He lets the Autobots know that he's not here to fight, but rather to join them. Whoa, who would have guessed that Jetfire would become a turncoat? Well, you should all have seen this coming, because I know my loyal viewers have seen my SMC series. On to episode 5. For this episode, I wanted to permanently go back to English because I noticed there are some slight translation differences, and I wanted to make sure that I'm reviewing the same information that most of you are probably familiar with. Japanese and German were entertaining, and Japanese in particular seemed to be a solid alternative, but anyway, back to the language of my people, American. This episode starts off with Soundwave using his Tony Stark computer to figure out the freaky energy that came from Ultra Magnus was some sort of Autobot code, and uses the Autobot processors as stepping stones to jump from point to point for travel. Megatron knows this has to be related to Alpha Trion, given his history with him and Magnus, and declares that whatever it is, it's gotta go. Shockwave proposes deploying a virus he developed, which would purge all Autobot processors that the code has been using to jump, destroying it in the process. They know that much of Cybertron runs on these processors though, so a nuke virus would cripple what's left of the planet. Megatron, determined to eliminate the protocols, authorizes it, using Ultra Magnus' body to transmit the virus the same way the original code was transmitted. You know, I'm pretty sure it's also a war crime to defile enemy corpses, but I also don't think the Decepticons signed the Geneva Convention. In the meantime, the Autobots interrogate their new prisoner. In the next room over, Bumblebee puts his newfound knowledge to use, helping Wheeljack locate the Allspark by using an old system the Cybertronians developed to track the Allspark, which apparently just jumps around the planet. Wait, hold up, if the Allspark had a tracker, why would anyone stop using that system? You would think at least somebody would be wanting to keep an eye on it, like, at all times. Second, why is it teleporting around? I get that it makes it hard to find, but what's the practical reason to have that set up before a war? Probably shouldn't leave your planet's most sacred and powerful artifact just randomly traveling around the planet unprotected. Whatever, I guess. Wheeljack comes up with the coordinates for the Allspark. One tiny issue. It's in the Sea of Rust. Unlike TF Prime, however, in this show it's a Bermuda Triangle wasteland with lightning tornadoes around the core. Fun place. They could wait until it relocates and hope to get some better RNG, but Optimus insists there's no time, so suicide mission it is, boys. Bumblebee reveals that he knew an ex-Seeker who told him that the Seekers had mapped out the Sea of Rust and actually can traverse it. Well, none other than the commander of the Seekers just showed up on their door wanting to defect, so looks like RNGesus has smiled upon them after all. Over with the Space Bridge team, they finally get it up and running, but need to fire it up as a test. Obviously that's going to attract quite a bit of attention, but what are you going to do? The Space Bridge successfully lights up, drawing the immediate attention of all nearby secret patrols. Instead of taking on an endless horde of Decepticons, Mirage uses his disguise holograms from earlier to cloak the entire facility. You would think that the cons would find the space bridge based off the massive energy draw alone, but Mirage can't hold his disguise flawlessly with such a large projection anyway, so this will be a temporary solution at best. Meanwhile, the anti-protocol virus is deployed from Magnus's body, appearing to take off all kinds of systems as it spreads. The virus doesn't actually become relevant for quite some time though, so perhaps the scene just should have been put later? You would think a computer virus would travel near instantaneously, not like a slow radial spread. We then go back to the Autobots, debating on whether or not to trust Jetfire, as he informs them he does indeed know how to safely traverse the Sea of Rust. Jetfire comes up with a compromise to settle things for good, a core override, aka bomb in the head, aka the Suicide Squad treatment. One problem solved, one more presented though, as Wheeljack says he's going to need more fuel if the Ark can be ready for when the Allspark is retrieved. RN Jesus continues to look down upon them though, because their new friend also just happens to be an Energon scavenger, who knows just the person they can acquire some Energon from. By acquire I mean steal. Bumblebee sets off to rob some Energon with RC and Cog, and I have to say, RC is one of the few designs that is legitimately good looking. Congrats guys, at least you got one. Anyway, the trio supposedly takes what's left of the Autobots' Energon supply to pretend to barter with, but if those two tubes are literally all they have, then it's an absolute miracle they're still in this fight. You'll find out that either a little bit of Energon goes a ridiculously long way, or this show has a problem with the scale of Energon being shown. The bots gain entrance to this shady trading post just as we cut to the Allspark team heading to the Sea of Rust. Back at the Ark, something seems up. The Decepticon virus is spreading, taking down Autobot bases across the board, and so Elita 1 orders a full retreat to the Ark, which is all set to go aside from the lack of fuel. Also, it's convenient that when the virus kills Autobot processors, it doesn't kill processors in actual Autobots. I guess Autobot processors aren't used in the Autobots themselves? Checking back in with Team Bumblebee, they finally meet the guy they plan to rob, Sound Blaster. Bumblebee does not have a good lying voice, which seems strange because that would definitely fit his character, but Sound Blaster buys it and sends him and his friends to the exchange room. While that's going on, you know how I mentioned Mirage's hologram was only a temporary solution? Because that time's up and Mirage collapses from the strain, removing the illusion that kept the space bridge covered. The Seekers overhead catch on pretty quickly and move in just as the virus reaches the Ark. The systems go down across the ship, including their cloaking device, which is the only thing keeping the Autobots safe this whole time. The Decepticons, on the other hand, are all reporting into Megatron with all his news concerning the space bridge and the revealed Ark, and so Megatron decided it's time to go all in and finish the fight. Oh, and also,
multiple explosions in Sector 7.
Who are you?
We're the government. Sector 7.
Never heard of it.
Never will.
while we're on a trend of things going poorly for the bots, Team Bumblebee attempts to pull off their heist, which fails quite literally within 10 seconds. Well, what else can go wrong at this point? Time to find out. Optimus gets another disturbance in the Force, and this time in zombies. The bots get surrounded and Moonracer loses an arm, so I'm glad we fulfilled our quota of everyone ending up in a bad spot by the end of the episode. Good news is that there's nowhere to go but up. Well, kinda, we got a bit more downhill. If you can't guess the name of the 6th episode by now, then you likely have a problem that you should discuss with your physician. The virus the Decepticons released finally hit wherever Sound Blaster's base is, and all the systems go down. The Autobots use this time to escape, even though all that happened was the lights got a bit dim. Conveniently, the virus doesn't seem to hit Bumblebee until he gets into a car, which allows the others to drive off with him. Also, the Autobots only grabbed a couple of Energon rocks, so unless that rock-to-liquid conversion rate is insanely high, then how is that enough to power the Ark? Whatever, I guess it looks to be about as much as the entire Autobot Energon reserve, so whatever at this point, I don't care. We get treated to this disappointing intro one last time before we see Optimus and co. fighting the army of reskinned models. I accidentally blinked and Moonracer died violently, so say goodbye to her, I guess. So, Optimus grabs the Allspark, which decided to just pop up now, and once he does, all the zombies get Thanos snapped for some reason, so everything turns out to be fine. That's problem 2 solved, but problem 3 at the space bridge is still ongoing since they're engaged with the Seekers. They mention that communications with Commander down because of the virus, so they're on their own, and keep that in mind. Back at the Ark, Team Bumblebee arrives as the crew is scrambling to get the ship airborne. Why? Because the entire Decepticon army is just chilling right outside. As the Decepticons begin their assault on the Ark, Elita 1 radios Optimus and warns him not to bring the Allspark back since Megatron will intercept him and whoa, wait. I thought communications were down across the board. Even the space bridge team couldn't reach HQ.
Nothing from command! Seems like the entire communications network is down!
I don't think this is being nitpicky, this is actually a problem since it allows for vital information to get to Optimus. I know plot consistency is a lot to ask for these days in media, but it would be cool if we had some at least. Anyway, Prime and Hound go to rendezvous with the Ark at the space bridge while Prowl and Jetfire return to base to fight off the attackers. At said base, Bumblebee wakes up in the middle of a war zone because I guess the bots couldn't be bothered to bring him inside. B is concerned because the Alpha Trion protocols were erased, all part of the Decepticon plan. Kinda pointless since the Autobots already got what they needed from it, but I guess losing an immeasurable amount of Cybertron's history and knowledge is kind of a bummer. I wonder if this will ever be addressed. No? Okay. Oh, also, Cog might have gotten killed in the gunfire, but it's kinda hard to tell. Meanwhile, however, Soundwave informs Megatron that Optimus is not headed to the Ark. Megatron realizes this must mean Prime possesses the Allspark and is en route to the space bridge. He orders Starscream to head for the bridge and for Soundwave to finish the battle here while he goes to intercept. Elita 1 and the others see Megatron head out and warn Optimus, and I guess Cog is alive after all. Must have been a reskin that died. If they don't have a name, they're expendable, I guess. We see action going on all over as the Autobot teams all work to secure their objectives, and we see that the Space Bridge team suddenly has working communications again.
Entire communication network.
Anyways, Optimus and Hound are intercepted by Megatron and a gang of Decepticons just casually strolling down the highway, and no, I'm not too sure how the Decepticons managed to get between Prime and the bridge while moving slower than him. Optimus and Megatron confront each other, each giving one last justification for their actions, and Megatron's a bit concerned about the whole taking the Allspark off Cybertron, killing the planet possibility, while Optimus argues that the planet's already destroyed thanks to Megatron. Prime escapes as Jetfire pops in to hold off the cons with Hound. Back at the Ark, Wheeljack gets the ship online and the defenses are activated. And oh boy do these defenses work. The lasers on board the Ark utterly eviscerate hordes of Decepticons in such high numbers that I swear there must be some war crime about this. With the attackers crippled, the Ark takes off, headed for the rendezvous at the Space Bridge. Optimus is almost at the meeting point, but Decepticons are all over him and the Space Bridge team. Prime fights off his attackers as the Autobots inside the facility head to activate the bridge. Under fire, Ratchet makes a run for the activation button, but Impactor shields him from a strafing run, giving his life. Optimus begins scaling the facility with the cons on his tail, but luckily the boss from the Ark arrives to help. Megatron catches up alone and engages in a one-on-one, but the Decepticons down below cheat and just shoot Prime. Just as Megatron is gloating about his victory, Bumblebee catches up and cheats on the one-on-one as well, so their cheating cancels out. Optimus retrieves the Allspark and holy Primus does he have one heck of an arm. The Allspark is just chucked into the Space Bridge and Megatron's pissed as always. Just to add more salt into the wound, Omega Supreme, one of the Guardians, arrives to join the fight against Megatron. Megatron's even more ticked off at the Guardians getting involved, but Omega Supreme says he's here on his own, not as a Guardian. Would have been nice to know that there was at least a Guardian contemplating joining the fight, but okay, whatever. Battle's pretty much won anyway, so he's a bit late.
Alright, let's do this. Let's kick some ass.
George, the war's over.
What?
Yeah, it's done.
Get out of here. Are you serious?
Yeah.
Megatron orders the Space Bridge to be destroyed, but one would think that he might want that intact so that he could pursue the Allspark. Foresight must not be one of his strong suits. Omega Supreme covers the Space Bridge as the Autobots board the Ark to escape. Red Alert is shot and falls into the abyss below, but we're a bit pressed on time, so oh well. All the Autobots board except Elita 1, who refuses to go, insisting that someone must protect what's left of Cybertron. As the Ark enters the Space Bridge, the entire complex explodes for some reason, blasting the sky into not nighttime for once. Everyone assumes the Autobots on board the Ark died, which I guess isn't unreasonable, but is there nobody with a shred of doubt? Everyone's so certain they're dead, which can't really be proven one way or another. Spoiler alert, they're not, because there's more parts to the show. No credits yet though, because we got one last scene of Teletran 1 aboard the Ark giving a warning of an unknown vessel approaching. But anyway, that was the story of War for Cybertron Siege. Not the prettiest thing out there, but could have been much worse, I guess. I really enjoy the tone of the show, however the plot certainly has some blemishes. Okay, quite a few actually. There isn't anything absolutely world-breaking, but issues such as the Seekers landing right outside Autobot Command when Impactor's comms weren't even near there is a pretty serious issue. This plot point is a catalyst for Jetfire turning sides, thus allowing the Autobots to retrieve the Allspark, yet it shouldn't have been able to happen. That's the kind of stuff that breaks stories. It doesn't ruin the show for me, but it's still a serious issue though, because the show clearly establishes that the reason the Autobots demand Impactor's comms be removed is so that he can't be tracked back to the base or signal to Decepticons. The entire point of removing the comms is explicitly clear, yet it has the opposite effect for no explained reason. I don't want to harp on this scene too much, but a lot hinges on this plot point which shouldn't have been able to happen based on what we're presented with. The show also has some general awkward scenes or moments that are very reminiscent of anime, yet this show took very little from anime, especially not the art style. It seems like it took some of the stylization but left the rest behind, so it ended up in a little awkward state. This leads to shots like the beginning of episode 2 where Megatron's just sitting on his throne with his inner circle standing next to him, just doing nothing. Nobody's talking, moving, reacting, or anything, kind of like Skyrim AI staring into the void until the script tells them it's time for the next set of dialogue. There also is this scene that begins with Megatron just sitting at his conference table reassembling his cannon while Jetfire and Shockwave are hanging around until they decide they have to say something. Scenes like these are just nitpicks, granted, but I found them to be odd and it would have been simple to just cut them out. Some more issues come from the action scenes, which are almost all stilted and somewhat odd and inconsistent. There are some battle scenes I would consider good and draw you in, such as the Seeker attack on the Space Bridge or the fight to hold off the Decepticons from the Ark's hangar. Having the Seekers strafe the Autobots who are receiving hits and casualties in an increasingly dire situation draws you in way more than RC and Cog just blasting their way out of an encirclement, running down an empty hallway in a hail of gunfire like something out of G1. I wouldn't even have such a big issue with the stereotypical atrocious bad guy accuracy if the show was consistent about how it wanted to handle their battle scenes. The reason G1's action scenes aren't as impacted by the cartoony battles with hails of gunfire and almost no hits is because that show is consistent with the fact that this is how combat is played out. What I mean by that is that sometimes in Siege, characters will take cover and be pinned down, returning fire every now and then like a somewhat realistic battle, while other fights will have characters standing in the open on both sides, spraying lasers at each other until the Decepticons get unlucky and die. You need to establish rules for your fight scenes or else it's going to get really hard to justify why Autobots can stand in the open blasting away when in the previous battle they were pinned down because a single shot was lethal. If the show fully embraced the run and gun mentality, then it would have been better off, but they just tried to have two types of action that contradict each other. The action scenes also seem lackluster due to a couple of technical factors. One of which being the models, which I have complained about before, but especially in battles, the toy-like appearance does not help make their movements and action seem natural. The second are the blasters, which seem to lack any real weight or power behind them. One reason I love Optimus's Ion Blaster from G1 is that it sounds powerful and gives you the impression there's some real weight behind his shots. In Star Wars, blasters are given weight partially by sound, but also due to the damage they leave behind. These weapons are shown to pack quite a punch. In Siege, however, all the weapons lack any kind of kick. They mostly all sound flimsy and leave no real damage aside from that one time the show arbitrarily decided someone needed to lose half their body. The weapons don't feel like they carry any weight behind them, which in turn lowers the feeling of tension and stakes because getting hit by one of these doesn't sound that bad, unless you're a bad guy, of course. At least the melee and physical hits sound hefty, but it's nothing special and definitely not enough to compensate for the blasters. Overall, the combat and fight scenes are lacking, which is a shame because the action has always been one of Transformers' strong suits. Why do I like this show again? I remember not hating it and I enjoyed watching the episodes, but after all these paragraphs so far, I'm just annoyed. Oh wait, I think I remember. Atmosphere, ethics, and world building. The show does a nice job capturing the tone the first trailer conveyed. It's dark, serious, depressing, and at times the world feels very rich. It's like the Halo 3 ODST of Transformers. Well, not really, but what I mean by that is that the biggest draw I would argue for both that game and this show is the atmosphere it brings to the franchise. The tone and feel of the show are vastly different than anything else we've seen in Transformers, outside of maybe bits of Transformers Prime here and there, and maybe Fall Cybertron. In my predictions, I said I really hoped the show brought that tone that the trailer had into the show, and they sure did. The tone isn't edgy and serious for the sake of trying to get into the cool kids club so they can kiss the boots of the Dark Knight. This is the first time in a while I felt that Transformers media actually captured the feel that Cybertron was a dead or dying planet. It has just the right tone to tell the story and generate a solid atmosphere without plunging into the depths of edgy cringe. And I'm not using cringe in like the meme way, I mean like actually like the use of the word. If you want an example of the tone I'm describing, just watch the beginning of episode 4. In fact, that opening probably contains all the reasons I think this show overall is enjoyable, and dare I say, maybe even good. The tone is dark and serious and has a well-crafted atmosphere, the world and lore are expanded upon naturally and leaves interesting questions. We learn more about the characters, there's interesting philosophical issues, and it all comes together. This again makes me pissed off by the models because they do not belong on a show with this tone and atmosphere. Do you guys get the message that I don't like the models yet? Do you need another beating over the head? Well, as much as I'd love to, got better things to cover. I think now would be a good time to cover the word I brought up a couple times, being ethics, or philosophy. I assume some people who have seen this show and didn't like it hear me throw in the word philosophy and think, oh, this bumblenut thinks he's so big brain because he noticed simple themes like war is bad and is going to act like this kid's show rivals Plato's Republic. Well, you hypothetical straw man, I understand where you're coming from and that's why I want to address it. There are people out there who will find the simplest of themes and think it's the deepest thing since the Mariana Trench, or completely make up philosophical themes and use evidence flimsier than Italy's commitment to their allies. Oh, 2 metaphors in one sentence. Wonder how quick I can run those into the ground. Point being, I understand that saying the show has some deep philosophical themes going on might make me look like a pretentious hack, make me look like a film critic. I'm not here to claim that this show should be studied in university courses, but there are plenty of interesting ethical questions. One simple yet effective moment of ethical questioning is when Magnus breaks free from his chains and holds a gun to Megatron's back. Megatron knows Magnus won't pull the trigger, and he's right, because Magnus is not willing to shoot someone in the back like this. As Megatron points out, he should pull the trigger, there is no logical reason not to. That is the difference between Megatron and the Autobots. Megatron is willing to pull the trigger for what he believes is the best for Cybertron. Magnus and the Autobots are not. It's not something as simple as Megatron will pull the trigger because he's bad and Magnus wouldn't because he's good. Megatron is willing to pull the trigger because he's pragmatic and logical. He knows what's at stake. The future Cybertron and the survival of his people, and so he's willing to disregard honor to win, because in his mind, he must win. Another issue the show handles is through numerous instances of characters becoming disenfranchised with the cause they're fighting for. And it's not just the Decepticons losing faith in Megatron. Ratchet abandons the Autobot cause due to the seemingly reckless resistance from Optimus. Ultra Magnus initially splits from Optimus too, since he sees no point in fighting anymore. What does one do when they lose faith in the country, leader, or idea they fight for? Or what if the reason they started fighting becomes corrupted? Even Optimus Prime himself has moments of questioning whether to continue his crusade, as it's sometimes called. Is all the death, destruction, and chaos from this war worth it? Is resistance to tyranny worth the possible, even probable, extinction of your people? Even if there is truly no hope, should they keep fighting? Some of the Autobots such as Elita 1 show concern over how blindingly optimistic Optimus is. Optimus is optimistic to a fault. He cannot accept any other outcome, so he will grasp at straws and legends, fighting no matter how many of his people fall around him. Elita and Magnus both beg Optimus to reconsider his plans, but Optimus refuses to budge because even a tiny shot of victory, no matter how unlikely, is still a shot worth taking him. The biggest example of this is not just the hunt for the Allspark, but Optimus' plan to bring it off-world. As far as many characters in the show are concerned, especially Megatron, this act could quite literally bring about the end of Cybertron. Optimus acknowledges this but carries on regardless. Instead of his optimism being heroic, it seems almost tragic. He's like the soldier in the trenches, smiling and letting everyone know the war will be over by Christmas. Even if the planet ends up alright, the fact that he knew that was a possibility and went ahead anyway is a morally interesting choice. Alright, I want to move on to one last thing that I thought was genuinely good in the show. The world building. This show for the most part does a great job not straight up telling us much of anything about the backstory and history of this universe without making the audience feel lost. The backstory and lore of this world are all conveyed through hints and mentions of previous events in a world that very well feels lived in. You get the sense that this is an ongoing story and that the audience is now just jumping into it. The writing and dialogue act like the audience is on the same page as the characters in a similar vein to A New Hope, just minus the text scroll. Honestly though, even if you cut out the text scroll from A New Hope, you still have a very cohesive story and a good understanding of the plot, world, and basically what the show did. We had hints and mentions of past battles and wars, a revolution, how characters have changed throughout the conflict, the state of the planet before and during the war, and even references to some of the other inhabited planets out there.
You ever go off-world through one?
Yeah. I used to go racing on Velocitron all the time.
I understood that reference.
The best part is that this is all conveyed through natural dialogue and storytelling. It leaves a lot of unanswered questions and omits finer details of even what truly happened. It's all conveyed naturally and helps build on the atmosphere of the show by adding a sense of mystery that you have to piece together as you get new information. And the best part is that the unanswered questions in history give you enough to understand the story but also leave an air of uncertainty that makes the world feel alive. It leaves room for speculation and imagination. Of all the Transformers universes, this Cybertron and this universe are probably the ones I buy the most. This isn't to say all the dialogue is some masterpiece of screenwriting, and there are some lines that read like henchman dialogue from a 2009 kids video game, which isn't helped by the subpart of mediocre voice acting.
The surrender stations are that way. Unless you'd prefer we surrender you here.
Also, this isn't necessarily bad, but any scene with an Autobot and Decepticon talking to each other kind of reads like this.
With our combined strength, we can end this destructive conflict and bring order to the galaxy.
I'll never join you!
The world building is solid though, and I thoroughly enjoyed piecing the history of the world and characters together as I learned more throughout the show. This kind of world building and storytelling doesn't automatically make it good though, and it can be done just as effective in other ways. And so with those positives, does the show come out to be good overall? Well, like I mentioned before, I feel that I need to take a serious look at what constitutes a good or bad piece of media to be able to fully explain my answer. The issue is that the show's been teetering right on the edge, which makes my qualifications all the more important. However, when writing about the good and the bad in the show, I found that I enjoyed writing about the good much more, and it definitely increased my passion, which means I can confidently say I enjoyed it. Although, enjoying something does not equal good, despite what many critics and reviewers will say. I know this is the case because when you're a Transformers fan, at some point you have to come to this fact sooner or later, because you can't say that most of Transformers content is good without like 7 asterisks stapled on. If I had to say whether Siege is good or not, either yes or no, I would say it is. I think a major reason I'm so hesitant to call it a good show is because it doesn't feel like one. The models and design choices such as the very empty environments really throw me off, and I think they subconsciously make me think the show is worse than it is. Other technical aspects, including the sound design and voice acting, really don't help either. I know the video game community has the common phrase graphics aren't everything, but in a highly visual medium like animated shows, visuals and design hold a much larger weight than in games where less than amazing visuals can be overlooked by solid gameplay. Granted, in a show the story is always first, which is why I think overall it's good, since I would argue that the atmosphere and world building do enough to carry the otherwise okay plot into good territory. The negative factors prevent me though from saying that the show is anything better than just plain good, and I could even settle on saying it's just kinda good. The visuals and audio aren't the only thing that hold this show back because again, the story is simply fine. In all honesty, the atmosphere and world building are having to carry a little too much weight. The plot doesn't stand up to much scrutiny, and even though you could explain some of the issues away with some outside explanations, having to write your own answers to issues in the writing is just poor writing. I also would have a hard time recommending the show to anyone who isn't a Transformers fan, and I doubt it would win over any converts. On a purely aesthetic level, it feels like it's fresh off the Chinese sweatshop assembly lines. When you pair that with a simply okay story, I don't think many people who aren't in the Transformers already would be won over. I've said it before, but the show easily could be mistaken for a fan film, and it's not to diss on fan films, it's a diss on Siege. It would be impressive if this was made by a few dedicated Transformer fans, but this is an official show produced for Netflix. Oh, wait, there's the problem. I get the impression that the people who made the show really are fans of Transformers, not just starry-eyed grunts who one day hope to make it big at Disney, so for now they're content to just churn out Netflix animated originals just to add another tick to their resume. I can sense that there was some serious passion and care put in by some of the team. It's unfortunate that the final product turned out so okay. In my predictions I said that the worst this show could be is forgettable, and I'm afraid it might be that. A few years from now, once this trilogy is done, do I actually think I'll go back and watch it? Probably not. I might get some fond memories every now and then when I see a YouTube video comparing every incarnation of Optimus Prime, but my guess is that at the end of the day, this show and maybe the entire series will be another one of those things where you stumble across something from it one day and say, oh yeah, that was a thing. And just like New Zealand, that'll be its downfall. Let me get back to the main point. To answer the question again, yes, the show is good. Just don't forget to add that asterisk. Well, several asterisks. Asterisks. Yeah. If you're looking for the next Transformers Prime, keep looking. If you want a decent show with a bit of a darker take on the franchise, then here you go, I guess. Either way, just try and remember it exists. If I'm gonna be honest with you, I even forgot about the show once or twice. I would scroll through Netflix with my girlfriend and see War for Cybertron and think, oh yeah, I'm making a video on that. Should probably work on it at some point. Well, here that video is, just in time for part 2. Not sure if that's my fault or the fault of the show for not being very memorable. I'm well known for producing content on a regular basis. And on that very fitting note, I'll leave it here. Have a great day, and I'll see you all next time.